I'm Ryan Folsey. I'm the editor of Scoob, and you are listening to a podcast named Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
Hey gang, and welcome to another episode of a podcast named Scooby-Doo, the show that attempts to unravel 50 years of mysteries, meddling kids, and masked villains. My name is Mike Josic, and I'll be your guide through all things ghostly and groovy as I investigate every angle of every mystery and beyond. So grab yourself some Scooby snacks, fire up the mystery machine, and let's start the show.
And I didn't make it in time. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. There are so many things we never got to do together. You're alive? You're alive! You cantankerous canine! How could you do that to me? Rasm. Stop! I'm not joking! Stop! Oh, I can't stay mad! You're alive!
Hello everyone, and welcome to the 37th episode of the podcast named Scooby-Doo. Now, I hope everybody out there is doing well, and I hope everybody is ready for another great conversation with an individual who has worked and toiled on this 50-year franchise in some capacity. And if you've probably gleaned from the title of this podcast, I don't know anybody who just sort of clicks blindly, but I suppose there might be some of you out there. Everything's possible. Anything is possible. Infinite possibilities in this universe. But I digress. As you've probably gleaned from the title, I'm speaking to Brynn Metheney, who was a creature designer on a number of feature films. I think she started designing creatures for features sometime around 2011, if memory serves. But the particular film that I think most people who listen to this podcast would be interested in is the 2020 Warner Animation Group CG feature Scoob. Now, I won't get too far into it because I think Brynn and I do a good job of giving a fairly well-rounded account or idea of what the process of the creature design for that film was like. But just kind of as a primer, I will say that Brynn was responsible for mostly the animals in the movie. She was responsible for designing Scoob himself, as well as Dynamite, figuring out kind of the physicality of that character with the biological parts and the mechanical parts and how he would move and come together. And she also designed some characters that didn't appear in the film, like Grape Ape and Jabberjaw. It's funny because Jabberjaw seems to be a character now both in the previous interview with Ryan Folsey as well as this interview with Brynn. Two big Jabberjaw fans. Who knew? I think that might become a standard question for any of the other conversations that I have in kind of this Scoob series. So, what are your feelings on Jabberjaw? See where that takes the conversation. Anyway, if you're one of the many on social media who has seen Brynn's concept artwork for this film, you're in good shape. Not something you obviously need to see in order to hear the interview or comprehend the interview, but I would definitely recommend going and checking it out after the interview. Brynn drops all of her social media deets at the end of the conversation. And I definitely recommend finding it, checking it out. It's pretty good kind of added value content to both the film and the interview because you get to kind of see a realization of what Brynn's talking about in this conversation. And the artwork is just fantastic. I mean, all the artwork that's been coming out from artists in this movie or surrounding this movie has been brilliant. I'm thinking about starting a quest, a mission to get an art book out of this because I really think it deserves it. So maybe we should start a hashtag or something. The Snyder Cut happened. Maybe we'll get a Scoob art book. We just got to really push for it. So that's all I got for you right now. I'll send you off to the conversation proper. So enjoy the interview with Brynn Metheney, and I will catch up with you guys on the flip side. Enjoy. My guest today is a visual developer and character designer. She's worked in film and video games and RPGs and CCGs as well. You might recognize her work from Valerian, City of a Thousand Planets, a highly underrated film in my opinion. She's also done work for Dungeons & Dragons and Magic the Gathering. Her work can also be seen in the films Sorry to Bother You and Men in Black International, as well as the upcoming Ghostbusters film. And for almost 2 years, she worked with real effects on a little movie you may have heard of called Scoob. Please join me in welcoming to the show, Brynn Metheney.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for agreeing to come on.
Yeah.
So I usually start out my conversations by asking people how they kind of first came into contact with Scooby-Doo. Were you a Saturday morning watcher as a kid?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so Scooby-Doo, gosh, I think Scooby was kind of always on, at least in my cartoon experience. I feel like there were always episodes running on Cartoon Network when I was a kid. I wasn't I guess an avid Scooby watcher, but if Scooby was on, I'd always watch because it's a fun cartoon and I enjoyed it. I also really liked Hanna-Barbera cartoons in general. So one of my favorites was probably Jabberjaw. Yogi Bear, I think, was probably another favorite. Definitely watched Captain Caveman, stuff like that. So anything that was kind of on in some of those vintage cartoon reruns and those sorts of programs, I was really into watching as a kid just because I liked cartoons in general. So anytime there was a cartoon on, I was like, oh yeah. Plus I'm a big animal nerd and Scooby being a dog is right up my alley. So I liked watching cartoons about animals.
So are you watching them on Cartoon Network? I
think so. Yeah. I'm pretty sure it was Cartoon Network. They would have that, or it might be ABC or some sort of local channel, would play them.
What kind of time frame would this have been?
In the 90s. I was a 90s kid.
Okay.
But, so probably I'm imagining it was Cartoon Network just because that was sort of the hot place to get cartoons as when I was a kid. And I think that it was either an after hours sort of vintage cartoon time or that there were early morning cartoons that would come on and it was usually older Hanna-Barbera cartoons that would play. So you kind of always knew okay, cool, it's time for Scooby-Doo and I should be in bed, but I'm not going to be because Scooby-Doo's on and I'm going to watch that and hang out and, that sort of thing. So
I think that was kind of a sweet spot for a lot of people to discover that early Hanna-Barbera stuff because they were rerunning a lot of the original cartoons because they needed content.
Yeah.
So a lot of those old Huckleberry Hound and Yogi Bear and Scooby-Doo and stuff that kids probably wouldn't have had a lot of contact with and at the moment don't have a lot of contact with just because now there's so much content.
Yeah, that's very true. I forget about that time being sort of, the network was new and you're right, they were really trying to find stuff to fill in the blanks because, and also for so long, programming would just kind of stop at night or it would be reruns of a live action show or something like a sitcom. But because the network was just dedicated to cartoons, it was having to fill in the blanks. I never thought about that. We were very lucky. We were very lucky to see those vintage cartoons. They were very good. They're very cool. So
flash forward a couple of decades and you are now working on a Scooby-Doo project. How did you get involved? How'd you get hooked into working on Scoob?
Oh, so, it's one of those, it's kind of I always like telling stories about getting into the industry, especially for students and people who are aspiring artists, who want to work in this, where there's more of a paper trail or more of a direct way and be yeah, I met this person and he talked to that person and then we got, this and then I was there. But Scooby was one of those rare occasions where the team just found me. Tony Carvone, the director at the time and then the final director of the project, he kind of was on it, was off of it and then came back onto the project. Had seen my work online and shot me an email out of the blue and was hey, would you be interested in working on a project with, I think he had Real Effects reach out. Whoever was officially supposed to reach out to me reached out. And, I was yeah, let's do it. I didn't even know it was Scooby-Doo at the time. They had me sign an NDA and then they told me. And I was oh, that's so cool. I might, I'll probably be designing a background character, maybe they have a creature in the film or something. And, Tony was so we want you to take a crack at Scooby-Doo. And I'm oh my gosh, I was so honored to get to touch Scooby-Doo himself. It was wow, okay. I'd never gotten to really like touch such an iconic cartoon character before. So I was brought on that way. It was completely by chance and such a like out of the blue job, but it ended up being one of my most favorite jobs to work on. Truly, it was such a fantastic team and really just a lot of fun. So.
And it was your first animation gig, right?
Yeah, it's actually been my first and only animation gig. It's kind of funny because when I was a kid, I wanted to be an animator so bad, and I wanted to work in animation for the longest time. I still do. I love animation. But I suppose my work is a little more suited for live action in some ways, which is funny because I feel like when I work in live action, I get so many directors who are like, your work is so animated and vice versa. So I'm sort of in this weird in between world, but it's worked out that I work mostly in live action films. So yeah, Scooby was my first and only so far animated film that I've gotten to work on.
Now, I'm really curious, when the movie came out, or just before the movie came out, you were posting some of your development images on Twitter, and you had pictures of Scooby-Doo, and you had commented that this was back when they were going for a much more real-world take on the character, and you were developing like a musculature and like all of that stuff. And that was something I hadn't heard yet about the film, that they were going for something that was real world. You also, I think your Jabberjaw images had some of that as well. And I'm curious, like, what was the brief when you got brought on? Like, what were you actually asked to do when they hired you for this?
So they still wanted, obviously the movie was going to be completely animated. It was never going to be like live action animation because I think they wanted to steer clear away from that look from the last Scooby-Doo movie. But they really wanted to try to bring kind of a Rango look to it. The studio, RealFX, had so much experience in rendering and producing such a high realistic look to their films. And I think they wanted to go for something sort of similar. And the original sort of idea was not gritty, but kind of a more serious sort of Scooby-Doo world where things feel really dangerous. And it was kind of this like Avengers type, idea where all these kind of like old vintage characters are coming together to make this sort of team. And that's kind of where we saw like Jabberjaw and some of these other, animals come in. But you can kind of see at the end of the movie, whenever like the credits are rolling, that Scooby's team gets like 2 more additions, and it's Jabberjaw and Grape Ape. It's still in the film. It's kind of what they were hearkening back to, the original idea. So coming on, we wanted to have like still very cartoon animated with like, exaggerated proportions and posturing and stuff like that. But they wanted to have a more realistic sense of Scooby as a dog instead of sort of the like sort of cartoon animated man dog that he kind of tends to be with like standing up and having hands suddenly and then not having hands and all this kind of stuff. They sort of wanted it to feel a little more grounded in reality. But yeah, that was the start of it. And then it kind of went back and forth, and then he stayed to where he's at, where he is now, which I think is, I think it was the correct choice. He looks great.
Your drawings, they did look you were drawing a Great Dane.
Yeah.
I was curious, were you doing that just in the development phase insofar as you're kind of working out sort of the mechanics of it and the physicality of it, and that wasn't like necessarily, even at the time, what they would have maybe actually put forward in the film? You were just kind of like you had the images of working out some of the mechanics of Dynamite.
Right. Yeah. So a lot of that is just exploring. And that's a big part of visual development, is just offering the team lots of ideas, lots of directions that they can head in to kind of like lay the foundation for either story or animation or character development in that kind of way. So in drawing Scooby as more of like a Great Dane anatomically referenced character, I was mostly there to offer any sort of insight into like dog physiology, to make sure that the animators knew like, okay, the shoulder's going to move this way. There's going to be like a dew claw here that acts as a thumb. He's going to have like certain, postures that are impossible, that sort of thing. So, it was kind of just really exploration to see what we could get away with and see if it was the right look, which is absolutely like, I think what a lot of visual development, is to sort of see like, what do we want this to look like and what can we try and where can we push it to see where we can go. So.
Did you have access to or go back to any of the original Iwo Takamoto concepts? 'Cause
oh my gosh, yes.
His design was very specific with like the bow legs and trying to make a Great Dane that wasn't as regal as a Great Dane should be.
Yes, yeah, that was one of my favorite parts about the project was Tony handed over like a folder. I was remote working on this in Oakland and the team was in Dallas or Austin. I think they were somewhere in Texas with Real Effects, and Tony was kind of back and forth between LA and Real Effects. But Tony handed me a folder of just like high res images of all of this concept work, like original drawings from back, with, Scooby's original designs. And it was really just a joy to go through all of those. Scooby's design is just so perfect and simple and such a joy to look at. It's really just a great example of character design. You know, it's to the point. There's great economy, you know, because again, animated films back in that time were expensive to make and they still are. Animated shows. So you had to keep it pretty simple. So it's, you know, very bare bones, but it's perfect. And I think that, or what was great about working from those designs was Tony gave me very specific instructions in terms of just like, take these drawings and like draw over them your design, but like keep the posturing the same, keep the proportions the same, but we just want to see like where the anatomy is so we can make Scooby actually work like a dog. So it was wonderful. It was really cool to get to see those drawings.
I saw an interview with Tony a few weeks ago where he was talking about how keeping that posture, keeping that awkward, like bow-legged look was so difficult because everybody's instincts were to like correct it.
Yes, yeah, it was very hard. And I think that in my initial designs of Scooby, he looks a little too regal. And I think that as I went on in the process, it became a little less so, but it was really hard to keep Scooby looking like himself, and himself is imperfect, you know.
It is interesting to me. I've mentioned before on the show, like, I don't think some of these characters get the credit, or some of these creators get the credit for just how cleverly designed a lot of these characters are. Like, when you stand the four of them in Scooby next to each other, the way they use the color, none of them sort of overlap. They don't clash with each other. They stand out from the backgrounds, like, just perfectly. There was just some, like, crazy alchemy at work there, or maybe he was just a genius. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think there's
which is probably the likely.
Well, no, for sure. And a lot of those older cartoons had really incredible color theory and, you know, character design principles in place where you can recognize the lineup of Scooby just by color alone. Like, they all have very specific color signifiers. And then shape just adds to that. You know, you've got Shaggy that's kind of a skinny beanpole, and you've got Fred that's a triangle, and, you know, Daphne's like a purple hourglass, and Thelma's an orange rectangle. Yeah.
Yeah, they were designed based on letters.
Oh, really? Oh, that's all.
On letters or shapes. I think Ewo said that Daphne was an S shape.
Okay.
I think Fred was an upside down triangle.
Right.
And I can't remember Velma, but I remember when I was reading his biography, he went through kind of the design theory of who each character was and kind of what he used to base the design on. And when he says it, it's so simple. It's almost embarrassing how simple it is.
Yeah, no, it is, yeah.
But just how iconic, like, those characters. And like you said, you can just recognize the silhouettes, like, in a second.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So what stage of the production did you come in on? We talked before sort of the recording proper that you were there between like 2015 and 2016. This movie's been worked on for a long time.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, was it already well underway when you came in and they were kind of pivoting, or were you there fairly close to the beginning?
I was there. I believe that they had been working on it for, I believe, like 9 to 10 months. So it had almost been a year. So they had quite a bit of work, and they were pivoting a bit because the original designers that they had brought on were keeping very close to like the original look of Scooby. They weren't really deviating too far from him. And then as they were developing the script and kind of realizing that they wanted this more action adventure kind of setting, they wanted to try to pivot the look a little further into that and kind of this like cinematic universe idea. So they, especially with like Hanna-Barbera characters coming in with Blue Falcon and Dynamite, they wanted to try to make it feel a little more serious, I guess. So that was when I came in. It was probably about 9 months into the project. So pre-production time. I was on the project for a year solid, and then I came back on it here and there to kind of offer other designs. There was like a random dinosaur I designed and a couple other animals that I would throw at them here and there in 2017. So, but I was mostly on it from 2015 to 2016.
You mentioned dinosaurs, and for some reason that took me to Muttley. And I wanted to ask, some of the images that you released on Twitter were I think it was on Twitter. It was some of the design work that you had done to try and bring Muttley to a more kind of realistic dog place, which kind of bends my mind a little bit because Scooby at least sort of has sort of a more natural dog look to it. He's just exaggerated a little bit, but Muttley is something completely different.
Yeah.
What was that
true.
like?
Yeah, so Muttley was, seeing the original drawings of Muttley. I mean, first of all, I've always loved Muttley. It was like so cool to get to touch him too. But he's not really a dog. He's kind of like a little creature. It's like kind of like a mop and his like bare ears, and he's kind of this weird little guy, like a gremlin. But
he reminds me a little bit of Cousin It from the Addams Family. It's just that
totally, yeah. That shape is it runs through him. And Tony was like, "Hey, we want Muttley to be a dog for one thing. Like we think he's a dog, and also, can you bring him into like dog world?" And I was like, "Sure." So it was, I think the biggest challenge with Muttley was trying to make him make sense from a standing position down into like an all fours position, because they wanted scenes where he would like run around like a dog, but then stand up and be like a character that could walk around and not feel weird. So that was a bizarre place to go, but I loved it. I actually used to take care of a dog when I was a kid that had a really bad underbite. So I had a lot of like memories of Mop. His name was Mop, actually. This dog that I used to care for. So I injected a lot of Mop into that. He's long since passed away, but he was a great dog. So, but yeah, thinking about
Speaking
like
of
how
dogs.
I could, yeah. Oh yeah, did you see one go by?
Yeah.
Nita. She's a Chihuahua. So, yeah, but just the challenge of making Muttley work as like a person, really, because he stands on two legs most of the time, was really kind of hard. And I'm really glad that they sort of ended up going back to the original, because the Muttleys I drew, I think, give you the idea of Muttley, but they don't feel like Muttley himself. Like they remind you of him, but I don't think they're him. So
Yeah, that was definitely the vibe I got too.
Mm-hmm.
I think in the tweet you said that you're glad that they went back to the more traditional, and I was like,
Yeah.
I 100% agree.
Yes, yeah. I was so nervous when they made a big announcement at I think it was Lightbox last year. It's a big animation entertainment convention for artists, and they had like a big reveal of the whole crew, and I was so nervous because there's such a nostalgia heartstring that you can mess up. And I was like, oh no, is everyone going to hate me for like destroying Muttley and everybody? And then they came out with the preview and he looked like himself. And I was like, oh, thank goodness. So, yeah.
It's really interesting to see on the visual development end. I mean, for people who are really interested in the behind the scenes stuff, they tend to see more of this, but people who don't know where to find it or just don't kind of naturally run across it, just to see like how far ideas get pushed. And it's not even necessarily this is exactly what we want to do with it, but you're just, like you said earlier, you're just exploring, working out kind of what does work and what doesn't work, and it's just kind of filtering all the ideas down to sort of what is sort of the best way to go about it.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if I articulated that as well as I wanted to.
No, you did. I think that one of the biggest things is, I think some folks on the outside would see some of the ideas and be like, why would you throw that away? It's so good. Or why wouldn't you go in that direction? And yeah, so Scooby, has taken on a lot of forms, and I think people might think like, why would you ever throw any of these ideas away? And it's just part of the process. There's so much that you have to explore to make sure that you're landing on the right page that you want and for the story, because ultimately the look of the animation or movie or whatever it is you're designing has to serve the story you're telling. And for this, it was a story about origins and where this team came from. So it made sense to make it feel like the original cartoon, because if it felt different, it would feel like an alternate universe and not like our heroes that we know and love today. I think it was the correct decision, because ultimately those designs serve the story of Scooby's origin.
And just going back to Muttley, I mean, I think he represents sort of what I was trying to articulate. I mean, it's a process of elimination where you want to find out what happens when we do this to the design. How far can we push the design? And when you go there and you realize, no, that original design was perfect. Like, that's what we need to stick with. And you're eliminating the doubt. You're eliminating yeah.
Absolutely. Yes, that's 100% it, is you got to try it to make sure that it's what you want. So.
Yeah. So you were on the project for 20 months, I think it was?
Mm-hmm.
Just under 2 years.
Yeah.
When you left, was the development stage over with, or were you moving on to other projects, or was that another pivot?
It was sort of ending. So they were starting to enter into production, and we had actually been like transitioned between directors. So Tony Carvone had been sort of like moved off of directing, and another director was brought in to sort of push the project into kind of another realm. They decided it wasn't really going well, so then they brought Tony back. So in this kind of transition is sort of when I came off of it. One, because I think like I was working with the new director and it was going great, but I think that just the direction they were heading in was very different from what I was there for. And they were also headed into finalizing stuff. So I wasn't really needed at that point because most of everybody had been designed or figured out, at least to the best of my ability. So it was a little bit of both. Yeah.
I remember Dax Shepard was brought onto the project for a while, and
Yes.
I haven't really heard much about that since that, just that he was on and then he was off.
So he was the director, and
Oh, he was? Okay, I thought he was
yeah.
just coming on to write.
No, he was there for a minute to direct, and it was fine. Like he was a pleasure to work with, but I don't think it was where they wanted to head. I think they wanted to again try it out, see if it was working.
Right.
And then they ended up going back to Tony, which again, I think was the correct choice, as Tony is so experienced with Scooby and has such a history with the character that it really made sense to have him be the director. And so he was brought back on. So, but yeah, he was, it was kind of a weird little like jostle to the project. I was like, oh, okay, wow, this is interesting. But, yeah, Shepard was pleasant, very pleasant to work with.
So we talked about Muttley, we talked about Scooby, we talked about Jabberjaw briefly.
Yeah.
I know Jabberjaw was a larger part of the film at some point. One of these days, I'm hoping to like be able to, because there isn't going to be an art book for this, unfortunately.
Oh, bummer.
Despite some of the amazing artwork that I've been seeing on Twitter, like it's stunning, the stuff that I've been seeing. But just to kind of come up with a development timeline, because you see all of this artwork, you see all of these character designs, but you're not sure where they fit in.
Yeah.
In that timeline. So you're like, is this something they were exploring early on? Is this something like they came to later? Is this,
right.
You're seeing these beautiful environment paintings and the much darker tone. And yeah, one day I would love to be able to actually develop a timeline.
Yeah.
And I went off on that tangent because I'm talking about Jabberjaw. I know Jabberjaw at one point was going to be in the film and he was going to reveal himself later. Because I think he was going to be like a big shark in a tank as a menace and then come to the good side, whatever. Right. You did some work on him, and
yes.
Were there any other characters that you worked on? That was a very roundabout way to get to that question.
No, it's good. I have like a folder open of a lot of all the characters that I worked on. I worked on Jabberjaw pretty early on, I think. Like, I think after Scooby and Muttley, I was put onto Jabberjaw, and Grape Ape was also brought in. Tony just posted about Grape Ape, I think,
yes,
shared some development work. On Instagram. I just saw that. I was actually looking at the Grape Ape work I had. I was going to post the stuff that I did so I could add to the pile online. I designed Captain Caveman, as you see him in the film, pretty loosely. I was the person that kind of made him have these like weird artifacts on his arms and, you know, all the hair textures and stuff like that we were kind of playing with.
That whole idea of going with like the dreads was brilliant.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, we were trying to, because the team was like, we don't want him to just have hair. It's going to just be insane to animate. And also like, it's just going to look like a giant fuzzball. Is there a way we can make the hair make more sense? And I was like, make it dreads. Like, he's a caveman. He doesn't wash his hair. So I did all of Captain Caveman. They obviously reined in his design to match the look of the film because my design was a little more like, I guess, realistic in more in my vein. I also briefly touched, let's see, who else is in here? There was Adam Ant was something that we were exploring a little bit of. And I think he's mentioned somewhere in the credits. And then Muttley was also supposed to transform into something horrible. And I designed Muttley as like a giant monster, which was a lot of fun. Dynamite was the other one. Yeah, I think that's it.
Right. Yeah, we talked about Dynamite a little bit earlier.
Yeah. I have a dog in here named Sherman, but I think that Sherman is Tony's dog, and I drew Sherman for Tony. for his birthday. Cause I'm like, who is this character named Sherman? But yeah, it's Tony's dog. So
It's interesting to see the threshold on these characters for kind of how far you can push them and into realism or whatever, because, I mean, we previously talked about Muttley and how it was breaking the character to, like, move him into a more real space, but your more realistic looking Jabberjaw looks fantastic, and I don't know if that's because Jabberjaw just sort of, like Scooby has a more, because Scooby also looks great, you're Scooby, but they also have that more traditional, naturalistic, it's just a slightly exaggerated form.
right.
So those characters still kind of look true even when you're sort of taking them into a more real space. But
Yeah.
because, like we said, Muttley was such a, I don't even know how to describe him, a cartoony version of a dog. Yeah, he's not an actual dog.
No.
It's not like a Scooby or a Bandit, yeah.
Right.
But yeah, I really dug your Jabberjaw.
Thank
And it's
you.
like I said, it's interesting to see how far some of these characters can be pushed and how far some of them can't.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting like study in what makes a character and how big shape, like we talked before, how big shape plays in the role of character design and recognizability of things, if that's a word.
I think it is.
We'll say it is.
We're going to own it.
Yes.
What would you recognize as some of the real challenges of working on the project?
So being remote was actually kind of tough just because I really wanted to be a little more involved with the team every day because it was just so fun to get on like a call every couple or, once or twice a week to chat with the team. So that was always kind of a challenge, but it went pretty seamlessly because of, things like Skype and project management software made it very easy to communicate. So I think that was probably a challenge. The other challenge I think was trying to keep, again, like the integrity of the design alive through exploring different avenues of what it could look like, was also a challenge in a lot of the characters, especially characters like Muttley and even, Captain Caveman. Captain Caveman is all hair. He has like no skin except for his nose and his arms and legs. And so as like a texture map and trying to figure out like where does his hair and skin end and like why was really kind of hard, but in the end, I ended up just painting him complete like brown. And I was like, we got to get rid of, because for a while he had a face and he kind of looked like Gimli from Lord of the Rings. It was very creepy.
I think I've seen some of those images, yeah.
Yeah, I think you have. I think Tony might have posted some of those. And he was looking very bizarre. And then in the end, I was like, we have to just cover him completely in fur or hair because he's not reading as Captain Caveman. It's like such a slight change, but we have to make it happen. So it's funny because I think the biggest challenges on this project were more tedious than large. They were like small adjustments, and trying to identify those small adjustments to make sure that characters read correctly was pretty difficult. I think Dynamite is the only one that really strayed into like another realm, and it's not Dynamite from the cartoons. Cause Dynamite, I loved Dynamite as a kid. He's my favorite, and he was such a goof and kind of a clumsy character, and he's not in this film. He's like, they've like switched roles, him and Blue Falcon, which I loved. I thought it was hilarious.
Yeah, I was so surprised how, like when I heard that Ken Jeong was going to be Dynamite, I thought they were going to go in that really kooky direction, and I was like, oh man, Dynamite is Chang. I don't know if that's going to work for me.
Right.
But he played it so straight and it's so earnest, and I really, really enjoyed Dynamite in the movie.
Yeah, I think that as far as an update, Dynamite was a great place to update because it just felt right. And especially if it's like set in modern times with like tech and what we know is possible in robotics, it would kind of feel weird if Dynamite was sort of a malfunctioning piece of technology. I think that it's a little funnier, and there's more of a dynamic between him and Blue Falcon, as, Blue Falcon being kind of a mess up or a disappointment to his father or whatever it is that he is. Dynamite being this like overachieving student, or not student, but like, this overachiever is such a good dynamic. Cause I can't really say that they had much of a story in the original cartoon. It was always just that like Dynamite would mess stuff up, somehow solve the problem, and Blue Falcon would show up and be like, great job, Dynamite. And then that was the cartoon. And so it was kind of like, all right. So I think that this was a much better update. But again, back to your original question, identifying those moments when you have to go completely in a new direction or back in the old direction, I think was the main challenge on this film, because you had to get it right. And I think that overall they got it very right. So.
Were there any characters that you didn't get to work on that you were a fan of as a young person that you wish you could?
Oh man, I was like really hoping that Snagglepuss would show up just because I love cats. And I thought that he would be such a cool character to have in the film, and I love his voice, and I just think he would be really great. I think I got so lucky on this project. I got to touch like all of the animal characters, and that was really who I wanted to be working on. So every time I'd see like a new character mentioned in the script, like I think when Grape Ape was sort of introduced into the story, I was like, oh, it'd be so cool to work on Grape Ape. And then they were like, hey, Brynn, you've got Grape Ape now, so go ahead and like get started on sketches. And I'm like, yes, that's great. Ugh. So there were really all the characters I got to work on. I was very, very excited for. I think when I got Captain Caveman, I was really nervous because I don't do a lot of human characters in my work, but he's kind of a creature. So
I agree.
we kind of went, so it was actually a ton of fun.
I don't know if you read comic books, but have you seen or heard of the Snagglepuss Exit Stage Left comic book?
No, that sounds amazing. I do read comics, but I have not read that one. I'm going to be adding that to my list.
A few years ago, DC did a line of Hanna-Barbera books. They had Future Quest and the Flintstones, and Wacky Raceland was the Wacky Racers. It was like Mad Max and Wacky Racers.
That's fantastic.
But they did Snagglepuss as a Southern Gothic gay playwright in 1950s McCarthyism America.
What? This is what I wanted in our movie. I wanted Snagglepuss to be that. And that's amazing that exists. So I'm going to be reading this.
It's pretty amazing. Highly recommended. Also, The Flintstones is by the same writer, and it's one of the most interesting sort of analysis of civilization and humorous that I've seen in a long time.
Wow. Yeah, I'm looking at images of the Snagglepuss comic, and it looks epic. I can't believe this exists. This is awesome.
I bang the drum for these books every time I can, so.
Oh, I'm there. I'm absolutely there. I love the Flintstones as a kid too. I kind of was like, are we going to see Flintstones pop up? Because with Captain Caveman coming in, I wasn't sure, but the focus was really on Captain Caveman as like one of the first superheroes and that kind of thing. So
yeah, I heard I don't know if somebody was asking Tony or if somebody on the production was kind of hinting that there was a question at some point as to whether there'd be any Flintstones characters in the Caveman area, because it was kind of a place you could fold them in, but I'm glad they didn't.
Yeah, me too. It would have felt, because they're their own complete universe. It was like, you don't want to even touch that. Unless it's like its own little place. So, yeah.
So bringing it back, you said Snagglepuss is probably the only character you wish you could have worked on?
Yeah, I think Snagglepuss would have been really fun. Maybe Quick Draw McGraw. I really like horses too. That would have been kind of neat to see. But they weren't really like part of or I guess part of the script in any way. They were just Hanna-Barbera characters that I was like, how would I handle that? Like, what would that look like? I never did any art for him. It might be kind of fun to like do some fan art or something of Snagglepuss, just because I really like his character a lot. But yeah, but other than that, I got to, like I said, I was very spoiled on this project. I got to work on all the characters I wanted to work on, and some that I was scared to work on, but ended up being a lot of fun anyway.
So you said you were there for a couple of the pivots.
Mm-hmm.
You made reference to reading a script early on. Without getting into details, if you can't get into details, like how much did the script change from when you came onto the project to what you've seen in the final product?
It's pretty different. I would say, like, again, without revealing too much, the main thread is there of Scooby being this sort of chosen one. That was a main thread that stayed alive throughout all the pivots. But there were a lot of things like, some of the characters' involvement, like you see Grape Ape and Jabberjaw, they're out of the final. And I think it was time and just trying to make the story like as tight as possible in the time that they had. So Jabberjaw and Grape Ape were kind of these asides that were part of it, but they weren't actually necessary, I guess, to carry the story forward. There were a lot more like animals just because of the like actual animals that I designed in pre-production, particularly in like Captain Caveman Zone, but those weren't there. But otherwise, like there's big changes, but the main, like, I guess, meat of the movie is still very much intact.
I know that there was also I don't know if directive is the right word to use, but there was a point where Daphne, Fred, and Velma's roles were kind of being minimized, trying to be almost worked out of the film. I don't know how much you know about that, or if there's anything you can speak to about that.
Yeah, that I'm not sure about. Just because like when things started to pivot a little more, or even when like Dax came onto the project, I wasn't getting the script as frequently, just because my role was starting to kind of phase out in terms of development. So I was mostly tying up loose ends by the time we were on to Dax. And then I never saw the revised script after that. It was just like random calls that I'd get, like, hey, can you design us a dinosaur real quick? And I'm like, yeah, that kind of thing. So yeah, I couldn't say that I know anything about that. That sounds really interesting though.
I guess at that point you'd been on the project long enough, you knew the bare bones of the story. Like they could just call you and say, hey, we need this character, and you know what to do. Yeah,
pretty much. Unless it was like something that I was, redesigning from the ground up. A dinosaur is like a dinosaur. They could be like, yeah, can you give us a T-Rex? And I'm like, okay, I know what a T-Rex is. And it doesn't really need to like do anything except fit into the style of the film. So that was fine. But like, I wasn't, after my work with Grape Ape with Dax directly, I was pretty much wrapped up on all the characters that I was in charge of designing. So, and I think that the fact that they even developed the characters a little further, like they really pushed into Fred being kind of this like all-American boy who loves his car, and, Daphne being such a caring, like compassionate, supportive character, and then Velma being like a brainiac, even more so, I think was really smart because they're so iconic. You can't get rid of them.
Yeah.
And I think one of the best parts was like in the beginning when they're breaking up, and who's the like random celebrity that's there? It's like Simon
Cowell, yeah.
And my husband was like, why is he in this? And I'm like, there are always random celebrity guests in Scooby. It's perfect. Like,
I read the junior novelization, and it was an efficiency expert in that story, and I wondered if it was originally an efficiency expert in the script, and they found out Simon Cowell is available and just inserted Simon Cowell.
It's so good. I think it's hilarious because there was always in the old Scooby cartoons, like the Globetrotters, the Harlem Globetrotters would show up, or someone would just show up and like talk to the gang like they go way back. And, it was I just thought it was hilarious and so random. But it really fit the style or the spirit, I think, of the original cartoon and those random celebrity guests.
So we addressed the fact that you originally came on the project in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
We are now just over 5 years after that point, and the film has come out, and people are asking you to talk about it. Is that strange? Because even working on a film, big effects film like Men in Black or Valerian, they've got like a 2 or 3 year sort of turnaround, do they not? Like this seems like a little bit protracted. Is it weird for you? Like, have you moved on and people are saying,
no,
hey?
I think, hey, can we talk about this? I think Scooby's special because, again, it was such a favorite project of mine and continues to be that I'm always excited when people want to talk about it. I think that I'm also a little bit surprised just because I don't get to talk about stuff like this often with fans or people who, write for, articles and stuff like that, just because usually with these big live action blockbusters and stuff, there's so many people involved, and I just don't know that there's really like, I guess people ask me questions about it, but with Scooby in particular, I've gotten so many questions and interviews and stuff because I think Scooby just has a very passionate fan base also that really want to know, like, what it was like, and they want to know about the character that they love. And so it's really special to be a part of that because I know that it means a lot to so many people. And I'm thinking that some of the other movies I worked on probably won't have that same, fandom. I think Ghostbusters will, but that's still a year away.
Ghostbusters could go either way for you.
Yeah, okay, we'll see. We'll see what happens. It's going to be interesting.
Judging on 2016's reaction.
Yeah. So we'll
I
see
didn't mind that movie.
But it was fine. It was fine. It kind of, to me, it wasn't really, it was another universe. It was like not really Ghostbusters itself. It was kind of Ghostbusters adjacent, but I'm really excited about what we've got in store for 2021 now. It was supposed to be 2020, but, the pandemic happened.
Yeah, I'm definitely curious. I'm a long time Ghostbusters fan.
Oh, cool. Okay.
every iteration I've been cool with. It's just another version of it.
Yeah.
I kind of felt in 2016 that without Ramis, you kind of almost can't find that spark again. Egon was so central to me in the films, and I mean, he obviously was part of the writing of it as well, which is why I'm really curious to see where the new film goes.
Yeah,
and which is why I treasure the Atari video game from a few years ago that was essentially Ghostbusters 3 that we'll never see in cinemas, because everybody came back for that. Aykroyd and Ramis wrote the script. I don't know if you've ever played it.
I have not played that game. I knew that it existed, but I haven't played it.
It's amazing. You play as a rookie, and
oh wow!
Because you're a rookie, they never name you. They just keep calling you Rookie.
That's fantastic.
But you go on. There's a whole story, and it ties into the previous two films. And Murray's there, and Hudson's there, and Ramis is there, and Aykroyd is there. I think William Atherton comes back as Peck.
Wow.
Yeah, like it's the sequel. Huh. It's the threequel. Yeah. If you love Ghostbusters, I would recommend checking it out.
Okay, yeah. I bet there's a playthrough online somewhere I could get a hold of and watch.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Now, I checked a couple of interviews with you kind of coming into this one where you do talk sort of about your background with character design and whatnot pretty extensively. Just for people who might want to kind of explore that aspect of you beyond Scoob, if you've got like maybe a bullet point version of how did you get into character design and what was it that attracted you to it?
Sure.
Or creature design?
Yeah, like I mentioned before, I wanted to be an animator as a kid. I think that came from having a steady diet of like Disney cartoons and Hanna-Barbera cartoons and just cartoons in general, always kind of being around as a child. And I became really fascinated with the drawing aspect of it. My parents, in particular, my father they were both really big into like movie behind the scenes stuff. And, my dad is an artist, so he was always like, oh, people drew that, and kind of explained the process to me. And I found that pretty fascinating. When I was, like 8 or 9 years old, I saw Jurassic Park for the first time, which is probably too young to see that movie, but I was like hooked and just, I know, right? Like, come on, get in there. I was in the theater and everything. It was wild. And I saw that movie and was like, okay, yes. I remember seeing Star Wars, particularly Empire Strikes Back, and being like, okay, yes, I want to be involved in this somehow. Watching a lot of Jim Henson as a kid with stuff like The Dark Crystal, Labyrinth, just all these like creature movies, stuff like Alien and Predator, which I also saw way too young, but loved, and still love to this day. I just watched Alien like last week again.
It's timeless.
It's time. I watch it like every month. It's ridiculous. So these movies really got me like excited about film and like creatures in particular. I also was just a big animal lover as a kid. I was such a like horse girl and also like a cat person, I guess. I wanted to be like a veterinarian also, but that was kind of it didn't really resonate with me as strong as being an artist. So I sort of melded the two and have always been a big biology nerd. So creature design was kind of that place where I could be both a biology geek and kind of just watch nature documentaries all day and also get to draw, real animals, but also fake ones. And getting into the industry was kind of an indirect sort of way. Everyone has their own story and there's kind of like not a right story or a certain way to do it. But in my experience, I was online a lot when blogs were a thing and people could like see your work easily without algorithms. So it was really easy to share work and get it seen. And I kind of had like a couple different entries into the industry. One was working for magazines about like art. The other was working in RPGs like Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder and Magic the Gathering and stuff like that. And then Valerian happened really early on in my career in 2011. Luc Besson saw my work online and hired me. Same as Tony Kervon. So it was kind of one of those like, that never happens. Like you never just get seen and hired, but that's what happened. And so I worked on Valerian and that was insane. Cause I hadn't actually worked on a movie before. And he was like, so what movies have you worked on? And I was like, independent films that you haven't heard of because I haven't done this before. Like for money, but I know what I'm doing. Don't worry. So I touched that a little bit, but then, after that, I worked primarily in publishing and then the movie jobs just kind of started to keep trickling in and now I just do everything. So I'm kind of all over the place. all the time.
Yeah, you're also teaching, are you not?
I am. Yeah, I do teach. I teach at, right now I teach at Otis. I teach their creature design class. I teach at a concept art school called Concept Design Academy. And I also teach in Viborg, Denmark at the animation workshop. So I fly there once a year and teach creature design to the students.
Cool.
So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
I heard you mention Star Wars, and when I was first looking at your work, one of the things that, and it might just be my unfamiliarity with a lot of creature design, or maybe there is some DNA there, I kind of felt, I saw some similarities between your work and Terrell Whitlatch's work.
Oh yeah, she's a big inspiration.
And I wondered if she was an inspiration, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. She, it's funny because I didn't come across her book. I actually have all of them on the shelf back there somewhere. I have all of her books. But her Wildlife of Star Wars book I came across in college. And by that point, I really knew that I wanted to do creature design exclusively, or something that had to do with monster and fantasy and sci-fi. And I had seen the book briefly, but I didn't really know what it was. And then I saw it in Barnes and Noble, and I just laid on the ground and stared at it for hours. And then I think my dad bought it for me for Christmas that year or something, and I was hooked. And so, yeah, I really love her work. It's just phenomenal. She has such a wonderful, observed way of drawing animals that is, she just knows all the little pieces. And I'm always poring over her books because she's got such a knowledge, especially a lot of her books have to do with animal drawing, which I think is so important as a creature designer. I mean, Scooby was a lot of Great Dane drawing, and I did tons of studies of Great Danes to really understand what was going on there. It's a big part of it. So she's definitely an inspiration.
I remember watching documentaries with her when those films came out, and how she was talking about really working out how these animals, these creatures work, and how they interact with the biome that they exist in. And it wasn't just what looks cool. It was very much working out the biology. And I wondered, is that a creature design thing in general? Is that something that you do, or is that something that was kind of, I guess, special in her case?
No, I think it was special in her case, especially for the time. And I think that with, the prequels coming out and her being able to kind of touch some of the legacy creatures in that book, like Tauntauns and Wampas and Banthas and stuff, and sort of explain what could be happening. Because a lot of those characters were just we've got a Wolfman suit. We can put horns on it, and now it's a creature, cool. Because Lucas had no money. They had an elephant with a Bantha costume on, and that was the Bantha, and that was it. And so Terrell bringing in her biology knowledge really helped kind of flesh those legacy characters out. And then she also was able to design new ones and make this whole place feel like it was real. And I think that that really hadn't happened in a creature movie before, that succinctly, I guess, or that elegantly.
On that scale?
Yeah, on that scale. Yeah. That's the correct term to use. And I think that it later then went to inspire a lot of the folks at Weta when they were working on Lord of the Rings, which was another formative film for me. They were really thinking about those creatures as where they exist in Middle Earth. What do they do when they're not attacking hobbits? What are they about? So the kind of how and why of the creature, I think, is something that Terrell really kind of pioneered as a philosophy. And I think that most creature designers had kind of been thinking about it for a little bit, but hadn't really applied it. And I think that after episode 1 and those prequels, more creature designers were yes, I think that this is a principle that is really interesting to follow. And instead of just designing something that looks cool or pulling out a random Halloween costume in the closet and, throwing spikes on it, how can we make it feel like it belongs somewhere? I think the only other film that might have, at least in my, limited knowledge, is Alien. I feel like Alien really kind of tried to have an organism that felt like it belonged in a place or had a culture or an evolution that was from somewhere else, and it felt consistent throughout. Yeah.
The only place that thing belongs is in our nightmares.
It's very true. It's very true. Yeah.
So this movie seems to Scoob.
Yeah.
Just in case anyone's lost the
train
here.
For sure.
So Scoob seems to be doing well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For all intents and purposes, it seems to be a success. I think they're talking about another one. Would you come back?
Oh my gosh, yeah. If they were to have me, I'd love to come back. It was such a joy to work on.
Would you push for Snagglepuss?
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah. Snagglepuss has got to be in there. 100%. He's such a good character.
If you have any of the right emails, you need to tell people that there needs to be an art book for this movie.
Yeah, I should email Tony and be like, hey, there's so much good work floating around. I mean, all of the work that's been posted online is phenomenal. And that movie pushed me in so many ways artistically, just because I was trying to keep up with the other artists. And even Tony himself is an incredible artist. He would take drawings that we would do and draw over them and be like, oh, raise this a bit and push this here. And he just has such an intimate knowledge of those characters that it was like boot camp. It was really cool to get to like level up a couple of levels on that project. So an art book would be great. I'm going to use my minuscule power to push for it.
It didn't occur to me at the time when it came out until all the artwork started coming out, and it really dovetails with sort of my mission statement, which is, Warner Brothers love them for keeping this franchise alive, but they don't really support it with a lot of behind the scenes stuff, with a lot of, added value content, for lack of a better word. They seem to think that it's for that, 8 to 12 demographic. It's Scooby-Doo. It's for kids. Nobody cares kind of what goes on behind the scenes. And this podcast was created to sort of explore that, because so many talented people have touched this franchise. And, if anybody needed proof of that, just search Scoob on Twitter and check out all the artwork. And I just thought it was a crime that, we've got art books for everything else and there's nothing for Scoob. It's craziness.
It's true. Yeah, I agree. I wholeheartedly agree. And what a wonderful mission too. I think that I think going into what we were talking about before with the prequels and with Lord of the Rings, that was such a pivotal moment for showing people behind the scenes looks at how people work on film. And I think that a lot of people, whether they're artists in film or not, even just fans or people who appreciate a good movie, really enjoy seeing the work that goes into these sorts of things. And I think it's important to show, because this amazing thing will just appear on streaming and you get to watch it, but you forget there's like thousands of people who worked on this tirelessly for years to try to make something that you can watch in an hour. And it's kind of intense to think about it that way. It's worldwide too. I mean, it's a whole fleet of humans. So, and sometimes animals are involved, but mostly humans.
So if you had to pick a favorite character from the gang, who would it be?
Oh gosh. At least from this iteration, it'd probably be Muttley. I really like Muttley. I like how grumpy he is. He's a man of few words, a dog of few words. I don't know. I like his style. I'm into that.
It's technically not from the gang, but I'll let it go.
Oh, okay. Oh, from the gang. Oh, okay. I thought we were talking from the movie. Oh, from the gang? Oh, gosh. Oh, man. I think it would probably have to be Shaggy. I really like Shaggy. He's so sweet. It's funny because I think it's maybe a tie between him and Velma, because Velma's like cool because she's like a nerdy girl and I like that, but Shaggy's just like here to have a good time. He likes snacks. I like snacks. I just think he's like a really supportive, sweet friend that you want to have, and will just hang out with you on the couch and eat snacks and watch a good movie, which I'm all about. So. And
if somebody was to say, hey, let's sit down and watch some Scooby-Doo, which iteration is your iteration? Which is your Scooby show?
Oh, probably the old cartoons, the like pre-Scrappy, the ones where it's just the gang solving mysteries, pulling masks off of millionaires and cops or whoever is doing the bad thing. I love those cartoons. I think they're just really fun, and I like the sound effects too. Like, I think that was something me and my husband were talking about, was how big sound is in the cartoons, especially old vintage cartoons. And that would be my choice.
My last question I always ask every guest. This franchise, it's been around since 1969. It is just over 50 years old. It doesn't seem to die. What do you think could be credited with the longevity of this show?
I think Scooby is one of those lineups or those shows where, again, I think the archetypes keep it alive. There's a whole gang. There's someone for everyone to identify with, at least. I think that what they, like, their mission in the search for truth and justice is always like something that I think that humans want to do, which I think is timeless always and universal. And I think like maybe people love like genuine characters. And I think that Scooby and his gang are very genuine to themselves. They have like a straight arrow in who they are, and they don't really deviate from that. And I think that has a lot to do with it too, at least in my opinion. Scooby will always be like, you know, a lovable, scaredy cat who likes snacks. And, you know, I think that knowing that is always the case. It provides a bit of comfort and provides a bit of accessibility for everybody from, you know, old to young.
Fair enough.
Cool.
So that's all I have. Thank you so much, Brynn, for chatting about your work on Scoob. If anybody wants to explore your work further, is there anywhere that you can direct them online to find you?
Yes, I'm almost everywhere. I have a website. You can find me at brynart.com, my name, and art.com. I'm on Twitter and Instagram these days, so you can find me there by searching my name. I just go under Brynn Metheney, and yeah, you follow me there.
Do you have an Instagram?
I do. It's under Brynn Metheney, just my whole name. If you start typing in Brynn, I think I'm like the third Brynn. Maybe.
Well, all right. Thanks again so much for coming on the show. It's been a real treat chatting with you.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure. This has been a blast. Thanks for having me.
If they do a Scoob 2, we'll have you back on.
Oh, I hope so. I really do. Cross your fingers for me, because I'd love to be a part of it.
And there you have it. That ends my conversation with creature designer and all-around swell human being, Brynn Metheney. I had a lot of fun talking with Brynn. I thought we had a nice deep dive into some behind-the-scenes Scooberphernalia. I hope you guys also had some fun listening to that. And if you want the fun to continue beyond this conversation, I would strongly recommend following those social media cues that Brynn gave at the end of the conversation. Go find them, go follow them, subscribe, check out the Instagram, check out the Twitter, find those images, because, I mean, all of Brynn's art is pretty amazing, but for the Scoob-minded among you, go find those images of the creature designs that she did, the Jabberjaw, the Dynamite. They're great. And I mean, if you sat through an hour of people talking about art, you're probably the kind of person who would enjoy art. So, I don't know. I was going to say, have I ever steered you wrong? But I honestly don't know if I've ever steered you wrong. So I'm not going to make any presumptions. I'm just going to give it my highest recommendation. And speaking of social media, I would also strongly encourage you to follow the podcast on social media. Check out at Scooby-Doocast or scoobydoocast.wordpress.com or podcast name Scooby-Doo on Instagram. I've tweeted about this, but I got a domain name. I'm doing the scoobydoocast.com. I'm not 100% sure what I'm going to do with it beyond right now the podcast. If you search scoobydoocast.com, you'll get the basic Libsyn, web hosting page that just kind of has like all the episodes. I'm thinking about snazzing it up at some point, but that takes time, that takes some effort, so we'll see how things go. And the previously mentioned WordPress blog, the blog named Scooby-Doo, I've recently meaning like in the last week or two, I think it was a week ago, another Apocalypse Variations, which I am talking about now pretty much every episode in the outros. Apocalypse Variations are short interviews that I'm conducting with artists who do variant covers for the Scooby Apocalypse series that ran for 36 issues from DC Hanna-Barbera, written by J.M. DeMatteis, who is a previous guest and friend of the show, and Keith Giffen, and various artists. Started with Howard Porter, not sure who it ended with, but on this particular installment of the Apocalypse Variations, I speak with Will Conrad, who has been around for a while, did a cover, now he's on the blog, and hopefully now you'll go check it out and read it. So that's it for me. I'm going to tap out here. Thank you guys so much for supporting the show, for downloading it, for spreading the word, sharing it on the social media, and if you haven't been doing that, shame on you. Like seriously, shame on you. I really appreciate each and every download, and in the last couple months, I've actually been hitting record numbers, which means I guess you guys like what I'm doing here, so I'll just keep doing it. Got some great interviews lined up coming down the pipe. The next conversation, it's going to be with singer-songwriter and composer David Poe and Videk Madala, who put together, performed, composed, all that jazz, the theme song for the latest Scooby-Doo incarnation, which is Scooby-Doo and Guess Who. I have no idea what it's going to edit down to right now, but the raw conversation is like 2.5 hours, which is amazing because we're talking about like literally 19 seconds of audio. So look forward to that. Stay safe, peace out, and we'll catch you next time on a podcast named Scooby-Doo.
Everybody cheer!
This is how we solve the mystery. This is how we solve the mystery. So in summation, this narration's my donation to the art of mystery solving dictation. And here's what the bad guys say when they play where the law forbids.
Would've gotten away with it too if it wasn't for you meddling kids.
This is how we solve the mystery. Bye.